For 8 years, Claire Donovan lived by one rule: protect the patient no matter what. She thought that was the mission her company shared, until she started noticing the quiet edits in safety reports, the defects swept under the rug, the urgent alerts that somehow never reached regulators. First, she convinced herself it was just corporate red tape. But then came the moment she couldn't unsee, the proof that her company was willing to gamble with human lives if it meant protecting its bottom line. Now, the worn box on her desk holds more than paper and a hard drive. It holds their worst secret. Each file stamped confidential isn't just a document, it's a story of negligence, a life that could have been saved. They thought stripping her title and cutting her access would make her disappear. But they underestimated the cost of pushing a woman like Claire out the door. Because once you've held the truth in your hands, you can't put it back. And this truth could burn down everything they've built in less than a day. What would you do if speaking up meant risking everything but staying silent could cost lives? Claire Donovan had built her career on precision and vigilance. Once an engineer who meticulously tested every component of a life-saving device, she had risen to become Director of Risk Management at Medivance Technologies, a position earned through years of holding the line against anything that might compromise patient safety. Her procedures were exhaustive, layered with redundancies, and in full compliance with both FDA and EU standards. To some, they were tedious. To Claire, they were non-negotiable safeguards against tragedy. Then came Derek Miles. His arrival was announced with corporate fanfare, Medivance's first Chief Innovation Officer, a title that sounded progressive but carried no clear definition. Derek's background was in software startups where speed and disruption were celebrated, and mistakes could be patched later. In the medical device industry, Claire knew there was no later. A defect that reached the market could mean irreversible harm. From their first meeting, she saw the cracks. Derek spoke in grand, sweeping visions using terms like streamlining, scalability, and market velocity, but never once mentioning patients. His flagship proposal was a new production management system, MedCloud X. According to him, it would slash costs, cut production timelines in half, and get products to market faster than any competitor. But as Claire examined the rollout plan, her chest tightened. Entire stages of safety verification were simply gone. The critical stress tests, thermal durability checks, post-assembly inspections, all condensed or eliminated in the name of efficiency. During the internal demo, she voiced her concerns carefully, explaining the regulatory gaps and citing past cases where skipping such steps had led to recalls, lawsuits, and even fatalities. She expected debate, maybe even resistance, but not what came next. Derek turned to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, then addressed the entire executive team. "This," he said, gesturing toward her, "is exactly the kind of prehistoric thinking holding Medivance back. We're not building horse carriages here, we're building rockets." The room erupted in uneasy laughter. Claire felt the burn of humiliation, but more than that, the chill of realization. Derek wasn't just dismissing her methods. He was dismantling the very foundation of safety the company had been built on. From that moment, she knew the problem wasn't a simple difference in approach. It was a collision course. And if Derek's vision took hold, the casualties wouldn't just be numbers on a spreadsheet, they would be human lives. Changes came swiftly, almost surgically, as if Derek had been preparing them long before he set foot in Medivance. Company's long-standing 14-step safety verification process, a structure Claire had refined and defended over years, was gutted in a matter of weeks. Environmental impact assessments were scrapped entirely, and biological compatibility tests, once a non-negotiable step before any device could ship, were struck from the schedule. What had taken months of rigorous checks was now condensed into a 5-step sprint, optimized not for safety but for speed. The warning signs emerged almost immediately. One of the first batches produced under the new system included a line of ventilators with pressure calibration data that didn't match the specifications approved by regulators. The error was glaring to anyone who knew what they were looking at. Too much pressure and a patient's lungs could be irreparably damaged. Too little and oxygen deprivation could cause brain injury or death. Claire flagged the issue and requested a halt in distribution. Derek's response was chilling in its casualness. The units would ship on schedule, based on AI prediction models that he claimed were more reliable than antiquated manual readings. It was then Claire began quietly building a record. Every questionable directive, every piece of evidence that safety was being sidelined, she documented it all. Screenshots of emails where warnings were brushed aside. Audio files of meetings where Derek dismissed regulatory requirements as bureaucratic theater. Copies of altered safety reports. Everything went onto an encrypted hard drive she kept locked away in her home. It wasn't paranoia. It was insurance. Yet the moral weight pressed harder each day. She had entered this profession to keep people safe, to ensure that no device with her signature on it could harm someone. Now, each morning she walked into a building where that promise felt increasingly impossible to keep. Leaving would protect her from the inevitable fallout, but walking away meant leaving patients in the hands of people who viewed safety as a cost to be cut. Then came the Boston incident. A late-night call from a trusted contact in Medivant's regional service team. In the ICU of a major hospital, one of their ventilators had malfunctioned during a critical procedure. Patient, a middle-aged man recovering from pneumonia, had nearly gone into cardiac arrest when the unit failed to deliver the programmed oxygen pressure. The hospital's team managed to save him, but the incident triggered an urgent internal report. Claire received a copy in her inbox before sunrise. She had barely begun reviewing it when her access was revoked. Moments later, a curt email from Derek landed in her inbox. The incident was under control and not relevant to her department. She was explicitly instructed to refrain from conducting any investigation. That was the moment she knew the danger was no longer hypothetical. Lives had already been put at risk, and Derek wasn't just ignoring it, he was burying it. The breaking point arrived in the form of a shipment worth $15 million, bound for European hospitals and clinics. On paper, it was one of Medivant's most lucrative deals of the year, new generation ventilators bundled with advanced monitoring modules. But when the compliance team in Brussels ran a final pre-shipment verification, the alarms rang almost instantly. The safety certification attached to the shipment had expired months earlier. Even worse, some of the supporting test data appeared to have been tampered with, altered in ways that conveniently masked deficiencies in durability and pressure calibration. Claire saw the report before Derek did. Her pulse quickened as she scrolled through the flagged inconsistencies, timestamps that didn't match the original testing schedules, test operator names that no longer worked at Medivant's, and performance metrics that were suspiciously identical across multiple batches, as if they had been copied and pasted. She didn't have to investigate to know what it meant. Someone inside had fabricated results to fast-track approval. When Derek's reply came, it was short and unambiguous. Update date. Do not rerun testing. We need this out by Friday. The euphemism was clear. He wasn't suggesting new tests or a proper extension request. He wanted the expiration date changed in the system so the shipment could be cleared, no questions asked. The European contract had strict penalties for late delivery, and Derek had no intention of letting safety or legality interfere with his timeline. Claire stared at the screen for several minutes after reading the message, weighing what little room she had left to maneuver. Every compromise she had tolerated in the past months had been in the name of buying time, of protecting patients from the worst possible outcomes while she tried to influence change internally. But this was different. This wasn't a blind gamble with safety. It was a deliberate cover-up, a falsification of records that could land doctors, hospitals, and Medivant's itself in criminal jeopardy. It was the moment she realized there was no path forward for her inside the company that didn't require complicity. That night, at her kitchen table, she began drafting her resignation. Didn't stay a resignation for long. By the second page, it had transformed into something else entirely. A 12-page manifesto, meticulously constructed and impossible to ignore. It opened with a formal notice of her departure, but quickly unfolded into a damning account of Medivant's systemic safety violations, each point anchored by citations from federal law, FDA regulations, and EU medical device directives. She attached excerpts of email threads, embedded screenshots of falsified reports, and transcribed key moments from recorded meetings where executives openly dismissed compliance requirements. She organized it chronologically, showing the accelerating erosion of safety standards under Derek's leadership. Tone was calm, professional, and devastatingly precise, every word chosen to withstand legal scrutiny. Before dawn, she sent it to the full list: Human Resources, the CEO, the company's in-house legal counsel, and Derek himself. But there was one more recipient, arguably the most important. She attached the document to a separate email addressed to the FDA's Office of Inspector General, marked as urgent. By the time the first employees arrived at Medivant's headquarters that morning, Claire's manifesto was already out of her hands, beyond the reach of corporate damage control. The decision was made. There would be no turning back. The emergency meeting was called less than 2 hours after Claire's manifesto began circulating. Conference room was heavy with tension, the air thick with the knowledge that whatever unfolded in the next hour could redefine the company's future. The head of the table sat the CEO, his expression a careful balance between controlled outrage and strategic calculation. Beside him, the head of Human Resources clutched a printed copy of Claire's 12-page letter, its pages bristling with sticky notes and highlighted lines. Derek, uncharacteristically quiet, occupied a seat to the CEO's left, his jaw set but his eyes betraying the flicker of unease. The in-house legal counsel sat opposite Claire, ready to dissect every word, every implication. When the meeting began, it wasn't Claire who spoke first, it was HR. In a measured but unwavering tone, they began reading directly from her letter, accusation by accusation. Each statement was paired with the evidence Claire had so carefully assembled: dated email threads, meeting transcripts, screenshots of altered certification records, and log files proving bypassed safety checks. The room remained silent except for the turning of pages and the occasional clicking of a pen. Then came the bombshell from the internal audit team, who had been working in parallel since early morning. Their preliminary review corroborated nearly all of Claire's claims, and added a damning statistic. In just the last 90 days, there had been 53 documented instances of skipped safety procedures. Some were minor oversights. Others were catastrophic breaches that could have resulted in patient harm. The estimated financial risk, should regulators demand a recall, was pegged at nearly $80 million. The CEO's composure fractured slightly at that number. He shifted his gaze to Derek, who stared straight ahead but said nothing. The silence stretched, a wordless indictment. Finally, in a voice that left no room for negotiation, the CEO announced Derek's immediate suspension, pending a full-scale investigation. The order was crisp, procedural, and irreversible. All eyes then turned to Claire. The CEO, perhaps hoping to contain the fallout, asked her to reconsider her resignation, at least until the storm had passed. Her answer was calm but unyielding. She explained that her decision to leave was final. However, she also made it clear that she would not abandon the patients who depended on Medivant's products during this turbulent period. She offered to remain for a 2-week transition, during which she would ensure critical safety processes were reinstated and monitored without compromise. The legal counsel noted her terms, HR marked the dates, and the CEO gave a single nod. There was no applause, no expressions of gratitude, just the unspoken recognition that Claire had forced the company to confront a truth it could no longer bury. When the meeting adjourned, Derek was escorted out of the building by security. Claire, meanwhile, returned to her office not with relief, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The fight for safety wasn't over, but in that moment she had shifted the balance of power. And for the first time in months, the odds were no longer entirely stacked against her. Hoy ChatGPT. The aftermath unfolded quickly, like a wave that could no longer be contained. Within days, both the FDA and the European Union regulatory authorities had launched formal investigations into Medivant's manufacturing and compliance practices. Inspectors arrived unannounced at production sites, combing through shipment logs, testing protocols, and supplier contracts. Their findings confirmed the worst fears: thousands of medical devices worth millions had been shipped with expired certifications and falsified testing data. Immediate recalls were ordered, forcing hospitals and distributors to pull the products from their shelves. The sight of crates being loaded back into trucks was a public reminder of what had been risked and what had been narrowly avoided. For Derek, the consequences were swift and severe. His suspension transitioned into termination within a week. Evidence gathered by internal audit and regulatory agencies left little room for ambiguity. He had knowingly bypassed safety procedures to protect deadlines and profit margins. The federal investigation escalated, and prosecutors began building a case for criminal charges, citing violations that carried the potential for up to 20 years in prison. His name became a cautionary example in industry circles, a reminder that leadership without integrity can be as dangerous as a faulty device. Amid the chaos, Claire received an email from the chief administrator of a major hospital. In precise but heartfelt language, they thanked her for her courage and vigilance. The recalled devices had been scheduled for deployment in their surgical units within the week. Had they been installed, undetected flaws could have compromised dozens of critical procedures. "You didn't just prevent a regulatory breach," the message read. "You protected lives." That acknowledgement struck Claire more deeply than any corporate award ever could. In reflecting on everything that had happened, Claire understood that the story people wanted to focus on was Derek's downfall. But to her, that was never the real victory. The true achievement lay in the fact that patients remained safe and that the company and the industry had been forced to confront its own vulnerabilities. By challenging the system with evidence that could not be ignored, she had reminded those in power that transparency was not optional, it was a moral obligation. Her own voice, once dismissed as inconvenient, had sparked a chain reaction that stretched far beyond the walls of Medivance. Regulatory agencies were now reviewing oversight procedures for the entire sector, and rival companies were quietly revisiting their compliance systems to avoid a similar scandal. It was proof that change, while costly, was possible. As she closed her laptop on her final day, Claire left behind one last statement for her colleagues and for anyone who might face the same choice she once did. The system only changes when someone is willing to speak, loud enough and with proof. Those words, she knew, would outlast the scandal, the headlines, and even her own presence. They were not just a reminder, they were a challenge.